All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Data is Live. I'm super excited to have Sadie St. Lawrence, who I have been a really huge fan of for a very long time. She's the founder of Women in Data. And yeah, that it kind of cues up what the conversation is going to be about. I love that like your company's purpose is just in your name. Like we don't have to guess as to what you're up to. But for anybody that's new that doesn't know about you, which is very surprising. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to start this organization?
Yeah, happy to share. As you can see, I'm not a marketer because I didn't come up with a name of anything fancy or particular. It was like, this is what it is. So the name is going to be Women in Data because that is what we do. We're about women and we're about data and we're about diversity. But yeah, my journey to starting Women in Data really came from my own personal need entering the field of data science of a need for community. And so in 2014, I was getting my master's degree and was so surprised when I entered the field that there was only one other woman in my program, and working around me, I didn't see any other women, and just was like, if I'm going to survive in this industry, like I need a community of people that I can learn from, that I can collaborate with, etc. And at the same time, not only just for my own personal survival, but also for just the progression in the field as a whole. I was so excited about the future of data and the impacts that we would have with AI and machine learning. I was like, if we don't have the whole population represented in this space, one, we aren't going to create products that are equal and representative for all people, but also there's going to be a large portion of the population missing out on the opportunity economically that you can take when you work with data. And so it really came from a personal need of community and a vision for equality in the space that led me to start Women in Data. So, during that time, I'm a big fan of slash careers. I worked kind of multiple jobs while running Women in Data on the side. Um, I worked as a data scientist and then led a data science team. I think even prior to that, I had some weird titles of analytics enablement engineer, research analyst, right? The titles in this data field get very creative. We could talk a lot just about job titles, but then went on to go into consulting and worked as an AI strategy consultant. And so really from that experience, I love being able to work in the field and then also be a part of the community at the same time. And then in 2021, at the beginning of 2021, I left my job full time to run Women in Data full time.
That is incredible. Okay, so I have to ask you, like, when did you know it was time? Like, you've answered the when, right? 2021, but like, what was the thing that told you that you could leave your like actual paid gig, your like jobby job to do this full time?
Yeah, so it was a long progression. This is now my 7th year of Women in Data. So like the first 2-3 years, I didn't see it becoming anything full time. It was about year like 3-4. I was like, I kind of need to prepare for this. And so I haven't had a child, but I compare it to having a child because I literally was nesting. I sold my car and was like, I need to cut my expenses. I was like, I need to pay off all my student loans. So I got like multiple jobs. So I was preparing just like personally from a financial standpoint of like, hey, you may be leaving a really secure job, right, to something not as secure. Like I needed just to prepare myself. So 2 years prior to leaving my full-time job, I was like cutting expenses, trying to pay off student loans, right? Just trying to eliminate any risk personally. At the same time, Women in Data was growing really rapidly. I think one of the things that the pandemic highlighted for all of us was just our need to be able to connect with others, right? All of a sudden, our world totally changed in how we interact with people. And so when everybody was stuck online, we saw a big influx in people finding ways to get involved in community. And that really allowed women in data to expand internationally. And as the community grows, what happens is you hear the needs of the community and you want to address them. So as the community started to grow, we started to see that more programs were needed, more programs in education, more ways for people to connect with employers were needed. And so there was kind of just this huge amount of growth that started to happen. And it was like, I compare it to somewhat like trying to surf, right? You can feel the wave coming and you have to start paddling ahead of time to be able to catch that wave. So me cutting out my personal expenses was my sense of paddling, and the wave that was coming was essentially the women in data community. So then, making the decision, I usually pull things down like to building a grid and a matrix of like pros and cons for doing one thing or the other. So I looked at it in two ways, both for women in data, like, is this something that I could add value to by being a part of it full time? Is it something that the organization needed? Is it something that if I put more time in, do I think it would be able to have a bigger impact? So looked at it from that side. And then also how to look at it from a personal side, because at the end of the day, I'm still an individual, I'm still a human, and there's my personal feelings involved in all of that. And I had to look at it as like, hey, is this feasible for me? And also like, is this where I felt like I'll have the biggest impact? And I loved my work in the industry, but it just felt like the biggest impact I could have would be giving back to the community. So I would say it was like the stars all finally aligned, and you have to eventually jump out of the plane and make that leap of faith. And you do your best to analyze every decision. But at the end of the day, it just really comes down to a lot of faith and a lot of tie into the values and the purpose that you're trying to achieve.
Ooh, spoken like a true entrepreneur. Spoken like a true. I feel like when people look at entrepreneurs, they really see like you're speaking at South by Southwest, or they see like your super cute photos on Instagram, right? They don't understand everything that's happening in the background. And I like was smiling when you said, when you were talking about like slashing your expenses and like getting ready to make the leap. That's huge. That's massive, and it's rarely. I think it's rarely talked about. Managing when to make the leap. It takes a lot. So kudos. I'm glad that like you're on this side now and you're doing this full time. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the kinds of problem that women in data are solving and the impact they're having. Earlier, you said, as we shift into AI and other kinds of data really informing a lot of decisions, we need the full breadth of our population helping to create those algorithms, creating those solutions. And so, yeah, I'm just curious, like what are women in data up to?
Yeah, so what excites me so much about seeing women work in a data career is they have this lens where they really want to have an impact on people's lives. And that you may say, Sadie, that sounds a little funny. Who doesn't want to have an impact on people's lives? But there's been a couple studies that have shown that women tend to have more of an interest in people and men tend to have more of an interest in things. And again, with any study, right, there's follow-up studies, because you say, okay, well, is that programmed? We give, girls dolls and we give guys blocks. And so from an early age, is it programmed that women tend to like faces and people and guys tend to like things, right? Where it comes from, I won't get into the details of that, but it's something that we typically see a lot of. And I think what's so beautiful about working with data and being in a data career is you get to use technology, you get to use information, but it can still be about people and it can still have a high impact on people's lives. And so when I see women entering this field, they really are not looking at it from just a standpoint of like, how do I make a ton of money and how do I have a great career? But they're looking at like, what is the impact that I can have with the data I analyze, the insights I derive, the algorithms that I build, and how can that change people's lives for the better? And so at Women in Data, we do an annual membership survey, and we ask women, like, what industry would you most likely like to go in? And always the top ones are very people centric, which is healthcare, nonprofit, education. And I think this is fantastic because for so long we have seen AI and data used by big consumer good companies, which has been great to help progress in the field. But now we need it to be in spaces like healthcare and education and nonprofits, where that can have such a large impact on people. And so what I love is when you invest in a woman, she gives all of that back to her community, and it just expands, exponentially. Right. And so I think that to me is one of the things that's so exciting about investing in women in this space, because they're looking at having that impact, not just from a technology side, but from a humanity side.
Oh, okay. That said, I have to ask you this, and this is not on the list of questions that I sent you, so this is a little impromptu. But I heard you say that women want to have an impact on people's lives. They are not just in it for the money. And so they're going into these fields, and I'm hearing you talk about healthcare, nonprofits, education. They tend to be some of the lowest paid female heavy professions, period. Right. And because they've been female heavy professions for a very long time, they experience a huge amount of salary stagnation, right? There isn't a whole lot of sort of financial growth in those industries. So with women wanting to be in those, like, I see the benefit on the products that they're developing and how they're using the data to drive decisions. But it worries me that, like, they're not going to get paid. And of course, we have all been tracking, pay disparities. And we know that if you're a woman of color, you work a year and a half to earn as much as a white man. And that comes from the opportunity gaps, right?
Mhm.
So what is your thinking and, like, sort of trends in the space just around compensation for women in data in these fields?
Yeah, it's a very important point. I think the World Economic Forum has estimated that it's going to be 268 years before women have were able to close the economic gap for women, right? So what does that mean? That we have the same finances that men have. That's huge. It's way too long, right? Like, that's not something I'm comfortable waiting for. Right? So I think there's a couple problems, right? One is just the industries as a whole, right? So why do we have things like healthcare, education, nonprofit work? Why is it that if you do, in a way, good work, you tend to be paid less, right? I think so. There's kind of a systematic problem with that as a whole. And then I think there's just the overall industry wide, right? Like, regardless of what industry you're in, we still have a large pay gap for women. And so
Mhm.
from that side of things, I think that's something that we can all take action on. And especially a challenge for leaders, like, this is something that, regardless of your industry, like, make sure that at your organization there isn't a pay gap. And this is something you can so easily do because it's all related to data, and you have that information in your HR systems, right? So at this point, part of me is like, there are no excuses. The call really is out to leaders of individual organizations to work with their HR teams and make sure, hey, are we being equal and fair in our pay? Do we have protocols and measures to make sure that there isn't someone who is getting paid less than they should? And using, essentially, again, the data to show where the gaps are, and then be able to make adjustments and decisions to be able to fix that. Because even if you are not a female yourself, you have a mother, you potentially have a wife, you potentially have a daughter. Are you happy with them waiting 268 years before they have the same economic freedom as you? Probably not. So let's dive into the data. And if we need to make some adjustments, let's make some adjustments as soon as possible.
That's such a long time, right? Like, how many generations is 268 years? It's like 7, 8, 10, a
Yeah, it's
lot. Too
insane,
much.
right?
It's absolutely insane. I know, and I feel like Shame is not a tactic that works very well, or maybe it's never worked. And so I think that, yeah, I mean, like quantifying for people what that really means, like 268 years. And by the time you get there, has like men's wealth compounded so that it's then again like another 200 years to catch up, right? So we're just kind of playing a game of catch up that we don't have a chance at winning. I want to switch gears a little bit and ask you about what's going on in the world with respect to women in data. Your organization is global, and when I was getting ready for this interview, I notice that you're in some countries that are doing a lot to promote just women in STEM, period. And so I imagine that it bleeds down to like more women entering the field of data science. Yeah, so I'm just curious, like, what are you noticing in your membership, and what is the impact in the countries that are making a really intentional effort?
Yeah, so we are in 30 countries, which is just fantastic. And one of the things that we did last year was we implemented a regional model. One of the things we noticed was just time zones of being able to connect, but also there are still differences in terms of progress that when a country is made in terms of gender equality. And so we have to be mindful of that in terms of where someone is at today. I think a lot of times in the US, if we live here, we take a very US centric approach to the world and realize that, hey, some people are ahead of where the US is, some people are behind, like, and we need to take all those into account to be able to learn from that. And so, I will say no one has it figured out. There isn't a country yet who has it figured
Okay.
out, unfortunately. But what we are seeing is really it's coming down to what is the need currently at the time. So,
Mhm.
we've seen a lot of progress in Europe in terms of what they're doing from a data collection standpoint and the privacy of people, and just more awareness there. I think the US is doing really well in terms of just bringing topics to the conversation, such as paid family leave, which is really big because we're seeing a lot of dropout in the mid-career point. And then, we have chapters in the Middle East where, a lot of women are still dealing with so much unpaid work along with their typical job. And so we're looking at like, where paid family leave isn't even an option or something that's somewhat on the table. So I think, it really comes down to one, being mindful of the current situation and being, you know, proactive at a very applicable way of how do we just make the next step one level better, and how do we continue to make progress on each of those sides. And so what is fantastic from a global side is we get to collaborate as a whole, because at the end of the day, we're all humans, we're all people. And so those emotional experiences that we all go through is something that we can relate to. And one of the things that I'm really looking forward to is in the fall, we're doing a datathon, to look at paid family leave for women, and we're going to be analyzing it by region. So looking at it from a standpoint of like, how can we learn from EMEA? How can we learn from South America? How can we learn from North America? And what can we take from each of the regions to see what's been done well? What could we change? And one, collaborate more as a whole to make more progress as a global society.
Oh, I love this. Okay, well, you're gonna have to share some more information about that. Paid family and medical leave is like something that's so close to my heart. It's something that I got to work on here in the state of Washington for many years, and we need it. Like I feel like as not just as women, but I think as people, we need to normalize and socialize taking time off to care for others, and really interested in seeing what comes out of the datathon. Okay, so a couple of weeks ago, I heard you on a podcast where you were talking about specifically like data literacy as being one of the really critical skills and really important trends. And as somebody who works a lot with HR leaders and DEI leaders specifically, I feel like there's pretty low comfort with data in those fields. And I've had a lot of people tell me that they've gone into these fields because they're passionate about people and not about numbers. And like, what's your advice? What's your advice for like DEI and HR professionals who might be wary or who might be just afraid of numbers? How do we like dip our toes into the shallow end?
Yeah. So having a math anxiety is a very real thing. There's a lot of literature about it. I actually had such bad math anxiety as a kid. I used to like hide my homework, and my mom even called me like a couple of years ago, was like, I found some of your math homework. This is like 20 years later, right? So I completely understand the whole math anxiety, and unfortunately data gets captured in that because it's represented in numbers, right? But what we have to understand is, I think we have to tie into a value deeper than our fear. So if you went into this field because you love people and you want to make a difference, then it's important to realize that in order to have a high impact is to be able to use data and use information to have that impact. So what always gets me through the fear of like my fear of numbers or my fear of information and data is tying into a bigger purpose, right? So I would say first, like tie into that bigger purpose of the impact that you want to have in that space. And then know that if you want to make a change in this space, you can't change what you don't measure, right? So if you don't have information on what are the current D&I stats of your organization today, what are your KPIs and goals, how will we begin to make progress? How will we begin to share those success stories? And so I think it's important for all of us to realize that we live in a world of data. I mean, even at the core of a computer is just zeros and ones, right? The foundation and underlying technology. And then from there, those just get put into an algorithm of being able to encapsulate those zeros and ones together to represent information. So I think we have to get away from our fear a bit and embrace the world that we live in and be able to tie into a higher purpose so that we can have that impact in HR and D&I professions.
Oh, I love that. I also had math anxiety as a kid. And it was especially troubling because, like as South Asians, we're supposed to be really good at it. And I remember getting like a 0 out of 5 on a math quiz and definitely hiding my homework in like the 5th or 6th grade because I knew that my parents would be so upset. But moving to the US was really great for me because the bar is a lot lower. And so I could actually be pretty excellent with my and moving here like really helped my math anxiety overall, just because it wasn't a super competitive environment. Yeah, but connecting to your purpose. Yeah, what is the bigger purpose? And if I want to solve problems, I need to be able to see where the problems are. There's somebody who in the chat who also I suspect is South Asian, and they totally understand the not being good at math. It's not allowed. My last question for you is, what's your advice for people that are data curious? Maybe they have math anxiety, or maybe they've never done a pivot table. Where can we go to skill up and build our data literacy muscles?
Yeah, so what I tell people is a formula that I use often to skill up in any regard, which is learn, do, share, repeat. And so I normally stay within those 4 phases only a matter of like 2 weeks max. So when I'm learning something, I'm looking to how do I apply it right away. So if you're someone who's data curious, what I really encourage you to do is first like find a problem that you're interested in. Because again, if you have like a bigger purpose of what your why is, you're going to be able to power through when you get stuck on that problem. So if you're someone who like I'll give you an example. The other day, I was looking at how many photos were in my iCloud, and there were like 17,000, right? And I was thinking, like, I wonder how much of my life is captured in a photo. And I'm like, well, actually, that'd be a really simple problem to solve, because I can see how long these photos have been here, right? I can see how many days. It's just basic arithmetic. And so I found out that it's only like 0.0002% of my life in seconds is captured in a photo. But that all started from just me having something that I was like interested in, right? I had a question of like, oh, I wonder how much of my life is captured in photos. Because I look through it and I'm like, so much of my life is captured in a photo, right? But essentially what I did then was just take it and break it down to, okay, well, how would I represent this in numbers? And I had to look up things and Google things like, I don't know how many seconds are in a day and in a year, right? Like I don't know that off the top of my head. So having a problem I was interested in then forced me to learn the extra steps and pieces of information I needed to tie them together. So that's what I encourage people to do, is find a problem that they're really interested in and then go through those steps of learn, do, share, and then repeat it. And I think the faster you go through those 4 steps, you'll just see this spiral of acceleration up.
I love that advice. Yeah, find like a bite size, like a solvable thing, right? And you also said like don't spend more than 2 weeks in each phase. Is that backed by data, or is this like your own conclusion? I'm so curious.
So there's a little bit. So one of the books I just finished reading is The One Room Schoolhouse by the founder of Khan Academy, and there's a lot of great information in there about active learning versus passive learning. So active
Yeah.
learning is that do part that I'm talking about, where passive learning is me sitting and either watching lectures or listening to lectures. There's only so much information that we can take in. I think the data that backed it is about, you get about like 10 minutes of really listening and taking in information, and then everything else from then is gone. So if people listening to this, they heard the first 10 minutes of this talk and now they're gone. Hopefully not. But I think that's important to remember, is the active versus passive portion. So that's why, I personally don't like to stay in each of those phases very long. I want to get into that doing aspect and then jump back to the learning aspect whenever I get stuck on a problem and I need to learn more in order to progress forward.
Yeah, I almost feel like this conversation is turning into one of my favorite topics, which is like DEI trainings don't work, and it goes down to not only the active and the passive learning that it's not going to be very sticky for you after 4 hours, but also the learn, do, share, repeat. You've only done the first step in that, and you've probably tuned out halfway through that lecture or through that webinar, and so the opportunities to do it, share it, and then kind of for it to be cyclical is so important. Thank you so much for hopping on. Before we wrap out, can you tell us how we can support your organization, Women in Data? What's the best way for people that want to get engaged to get engaged? And yeah.
Yeah, so, if you are a woman in data or an ally, you're welcome to come and become a member. I mean, one of the best ways to support is to be a part of the community, to volunteer at some of the chapters, to be engaged in the programs. That's a fantastic way. And then if that doesn't fit with your time and schedule, we also have a WID scholarship. So we give out programs and memberships to people in need. That's a great way to be able to engage and donate towards. And then, a super easy and light way is always just to follow us on social media, to elevate the women's voices that we share. We have a Member Monday and a WID Wins Wednesday that we love to just share the success stories of all the amazing things women are doing in this space. So that's a super easy way to get engaged as well.
Oh, thank you. All right. Follow on social media, sign up for a membership, and then stay connected, because in the fall, you're going to do this data-thon on paid family and medical leave. Sadie, thank you so much for joining me this morning. And I'm excited to follow your journey and all the amazing things that you're going to build with this organization. And everybody else that's watching, thank you. Have a great day. Happy Monday, y'all.
Thanks so much.